This is episode 55 of the Construction Leading Edge podcast, the podcast for construction business owners and leaders. My name is Todd DeWalt. I'm your host. And today we have an interview with Dan Parish. He is the CEO of Millworks By Design in California. And we're going to talk about how Dan started this business in 2007, just before the recession. Why it could be a bad thing to start a business at the height of the market, why it's a good thing sometimes to start a business in the middle of a recession, how Dan started out as a finished carpenter and a stair builder, transitioned into starting up his own business. We also talk about his advice if you're thinking about starting up a construction company, also his approach to leadership, some advice that he would have for you if you lead a construction company, and how important the culture of a company is. Also talk about some book recommendations and the benefits of hiring millennials. A lot of talk about millennials these days. So we're going to get into that interview in just a minute. But before we do that, let me ask you a question. A couple of questions. Is your crew working at peak efficiency? Do you find yourself often frustrated about their production, or maybe more precisely, their lack of production? Does it seem like your field employees are just not as productive as they should be? Maybe you know that your crews are not as productive as they should be, but you're just not where to start out. Where should you start? Well, if that's you, you're not alone, because the reality is we're in the middle of a productivity crisis in the construction industry. I travel around to a lot of different job sites, and I see it. I see a lack of production, which results in a lot of problems, delayed projects, losing money, which sets off a domino effect. It is a big problem. So what can we do about it? Well, I've put together a 3-part video series with some simple, often no-cost strategies that you can use to improve your crew's productivity and profitability. Now, these are not just theories. These are not the rantings of a madman. These are strategies that I have used personally, and I can tell you from my experience, they are game changers. I've used these, and they are game changers. I guarantee it. So when you watch these videos with productivity tips, here's what you're going to learn. You're going to learn the number one productivity killer according to a 2012 study and what you can do to beat it, how to avoid double handling and damaging materials once they are delivered to the site. You'll learn about the McDonald's rule and how it can help you. You'll learn about 2 activities that could be costing you $73 per day per employee. The one question that you need to ask your crews every day that will make you money. You'll learn about how you may be going about delegation completely wrong. And last but not least, you'll learn the best way to starve a horse. That's right, the best way to starve a horse. So to sign up to receive these free videos, go to constructionleadingedge.com/productivity. That's constructionleadingedge.com/productivity. Hit the red button there that says, yes, I want to sign up. Put your email address in, and I will send you those videos to your email box. So now, without further ado, let's get into the interview with Dan Parish. Dan Parish, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I am doing great, Todd. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we were just talking before I hit record that you've been listening to the podcast, and so it's always good to have somebody on who is plugged into the community and solving the problems that we're out to solve. So tell us a little bit about what you do, your business, where you're located, the kind of work you do. Just give us a little introduction, if you would.
Okay. Well, my business is named Millworks By Design. I own it with my partner, Zach Eaglet. And we're located in Southern California. We're right in the LA area. And we specialize in high-end architectural millwork, mostly for residential projects, but we're starting to edge into some high-end boutique commercial, like country clubs, things like that.
And give us an idea of the size of your company, number of employees, some measure to give us an indication of how big or how small you are.
Okay. We have about 70 people right now. These are all in-house employees. We do subcontract out a fair bit of manufacturing. So we're probably comparable to a company a manufacturing company that manufactures and installs that might be about 120 or 150 employees.
So high-end residential millwork, making your way into commercial work. When did you start the business?
We are actually coming up on our 10th anniversary in July. We started in 2007, about 3 months before the news of the recession really hit, which really scared us at the time. But looking back, it was probably, only in hindsight, I should add, it was probably really good timing to be starting at the bottom of the market.
Yeah, explain that statement. Why was it a good time to be starting a construction business? Because that's not intuitive.
It's not, and it might be kind of our own unique experience being in the market that we're in. There's always activity in the high-end market. I know that many tract home builders were completely shut down. Lots of commercial was completely shut down. But in the high-end residential market, there were still people building houses. There was less people building houses, but there was still activity. The prices dropped tremendously. I would say that if you were looking at a labor charge per hour, it probably dropped anywhere from 30 to 45%, going from 2006 to 2007. And the biggest reason why I think it was good for us to start at the bottom is because if we had started our company 2 or 3 years earlier and had gotten used to what were very inflated prices, I think that we would not have been able to handle the price drop. I think we would have probably gone out of business because we would not have organized our company in a way that was lean enough.
Interesting.
Or maybe would have been too immature to realize what was going on with the market fast enough and be able to react.
Makes sense. So yeah, in that sense, it is a good time to start a business because you're forced to be lean and mean, otherwise you don't survive.
Exactly. And there was definitely challenges. We didn't make money for the first 3 years. And so, we had to learn right from the start how to manage our cash and how to be conservative financially, or die. So we got some of those big lessons kind of out of the way early. Whereas if we had started in a really hot market, I think that the lessons would have been a lot more painful and a lot more sudden.
Yeah, I can see where if someone started a business now, for example, at least in a lot of parts of the country, the market's pretty hot.
Yep.
There's a more demand than there is supply for contractors, and I could see where a contractor starting out could jump in and book up some work, take on some debt, maybe hire the wrong people, and those bad habits would be supported right now by a hot market, but then when things go sideways, then the economics no longer support bad business practice. Interesting.
Exactly. And I think that, when you're making money, when you're seeing a big profit margin, it's very easy to pat yourself on the back and think that you're doing a good job. And the reality is it might just be that you're able to price it high enough to cover all your waste.
True.
And all your inefficiencies and dysfunctions. And, when you're making money, it is easy to not see those things.
Yeah, interesting. If you would paint the picture for us of how you started your business. What were you doing before that? Did you just jump from one thing into starting a business? Was it a transition into part-time gig to full-time gig? Kind of walk us through what that startup process looked like.
Okay. Well, I should say that I've always been, for as long as I can remember, I've always been entrepreneurial. I grew up out in the country and always had some sort of livestock business going on from a very young age. And and really construction was not really something that I thought I was going to do until later on in my teens. I would say like 16 or 17 is when I really transitioned out of kind of the ag interests into construction. My dad was an architect, and I really have to hand it to him for kind of planting the seeds of the original vision, because he always talked about seeing a decline in the skilled trades. And this is going back, I mean, probably 20, 25 years ago, where he started seeing this on his projects. He was a commercial architect, and he did mostly like hospitals and airports and schools and things like that. And he was seeing a real decline, and he always would encourage me to, to think about the trades as a business. And he even encouraged me to, instead of going to college, spending time as a late teen, early 20s, really learning a trade, because that, even if you never started a business there, it would be something that you could always fall back on. And so when I left home, that is what I did. I decided that I wanted to be a framer, a custom framer, which I never actually got the opportunity to do. I actually went right into finished carpentry and kind of fell in love with it. I was lucky enough to start on a big, really custom house, and got exposed to all different kinds of things, paneling, crown, door hanging, all kinds of things. And I just really fell in love with that part of the trade and decided to stick with it. And so my focus was learning the trade, but it was always with the intent of eventually starting a company. So I had a few kind of varied experiences. I got lucky. I worked for a couple years with a guy named Gary Katz, who I'm sure at least some of your listeners know. Do you know Gary, Todd?
No, I don't think I do.
He's now he's completely devoted to traveling the country and publishing educational materials on finished carpentry. And it's really kind of a for pros by pros approach. It's not really for the masses, but he's really made an impact on the finished carpentry community. And because of just kind of happening to start working with him, that exposed me to a lot of other opportunities. Like I ended up doing a little bit of traveling with him, doing live finished carpentry clinics, and he helped me publish a few articles in some trade magazines. And it just kind of opened up the idea that this was a real professional thing to do, that you could be a real professional in the trades, which is a big idea that Gary really pushes. And from there, I ended up working for a company in LA. Actually, before that, I went back east and did an apprenticeship with a stair builder back east. I really wanted to build stairs because I felt that was really kind of the pinnacle of kind of construction grade fine woodworking. And so I came back to Los Angeles and got a job with a stair building company. And I ended up starting a finished carpentry division within that company. And long story short, a couple years later, ended up leaving and starting Millworks by Design with my partner, Zach Eglet. And that was back in 2007.
Got it. If you had it to do over again and you could start up your business or start your career differently, what's one thing you would do differently?
That's a good question, because I've had that question before, and I never know how to answer it, because you always think about the mistakes that you made, like you wouldn't want to repeat them, but oftentimes it's the mistakes that you make that provide the best learning and really kind of shape where you are today, right?
Very true.
I don't know. I do know that if I had the same experience that I have now and I was going to do it again, I would focus a lot more on people and a lot more on kind of bottom line results and less on revenue, less on size, less on the things that kind of matter to your ego and more on the things that matter to your relationships and your bank account.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think there are some common misconceptions among people who are considering starting a business, or maybe those who own a business, about what does, quote, success look like?
Yes.
So what do you think are common misconceptions that people think are indications of success, but in reality don't really mean a crap?
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind right away is size of a company. Mm-hmm. I think there's a giant misconception out there that just because a company is large means that somebody's more successful than somebody whose company is smaller. And the reality is there are smaller companies out there that make more profits than larger companies. There's also companies that are smaller but much more complex than larger companies. And I think that you really have to, if you get caught up in this dynamic where you're looking at everybody else and comparing yourself to them, I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. Because every situation is so different.
What do you think happens when people get into that comparison trap? What does it do to somebody who's trying to run a business?
Well, I think it makes you insecure because you are always looking for the person who's more successful than you, and you're always wondering what you've missed, what you're not doing. And I could sit here and compare myself to Mark Zuckerberg, who happens to be exactly the same age as I am, and look at the size of the company that he's built. If I dwell on that too long, I could really depress myself.
Yeah.
There's always somebody out there who has a bigger company, who's more successful, has more employees, whatever. I mean, whatever metric you want to put on it, you can always find somebody out there who's got more. And I think that you're a lot better off if you just focus on what you're doing, on really defining success for yourself, and forgetting about what's going on around you. Stop comparing yourself.
Yeah, it really doesn't do you any good to compare yourself to somebody who's ahead of you, or for that matter, somebody who's maybe behind you a few years.
Right. Now, that being said, I do think that it's important to, if you are looking for advice, I think it is a good idea to be with people who cause you to stretch. In other words, if you're running a company with 10 people, search out somebody who's running a company with 20 people so that you can start to get a taste of what they're dealing with, mm-hmm. and the kinds of issues that they're dealing with, so that you can prepare yourself as your company grows. I do think that dynamic is important.
Yeah, and similarly, help the folks. If you have 10 employees, then be willing to help somebody who has 2 or 3 employees, and
exactly
kind of pay it forward. Yeah, we all get better together. I think that's the right approach. Is there's plenty of work to go around. Insecurity, comparison, that just doesn't help. None
of that's productive.
Yeah, it's a giant waste of time.
Yep.
So, question about starting up a business: is it better to bootstrap or to try to get some backing, some financing? What are your thoughts on
that? Well, in my case, I started with a little bit of financing, but I think it was good in the sense that it wasn't too much. I think for a construction company, you can start with a little bit of money or almost no money and that you're probably better off doing it that way than starting with a bunch of money. You start with too much money, and the reality is at that stage of setting up a business, you just don't know how to spend that money wisely.
True.
Looking back 10 years later, I can say that for a fact, that unless you've gone through that experience, I think it's very easy to blow the money that you have.
Agreed. I think the process of bootstrapping prepares you to have cash. And
yes.
If you get an artificial injection of cash, then you don't have the skills to manage that, and you're not prepared for it. So,
and I honestly think that even if you do have skills, you don't know enough about your business to invest that money wisely. For example, I can still remember, literally within weeks of starting the company, we went out and we bought a bunch of material to build out a really nice conference room, like a white oak raised panel conference room. And what actually happened was the conference room never got built. And we had this material sitting on our shelf for years.
So Dan, when do you know it's the right time to start your business and make that jump?
I do think that you can be overly careful about when the right time is, because sometimes you just need to go. That being said, I do think that I think there is something to the market aspect. I think that going in at the height of a market, it could be a bad idea. I don't think that is the case for maybe all people, but I do think that you're going to have a much different experience if you enter at a really hot market, and then maybe somehow end up in a recession 2 years later. I also think that people need to be prepared or really have in mind what kind of business they are starting. Are they going to start and work out of the back of their truck, or are they going to start and scale up quickly? And I think doing those two things are far different from each other. If you're scaling up quickly, you need to be prepared for things that you may not be prepared for, you may not have thought about.
If you were speaking to someone, let's say somebody came up to you and said, Dan, I want to start a business. I'm passionate about construction. I've got a little bit of experience. I have no money. How can I get my foot in the door? How can I get started running a construction business? I'm a one-man operation, a one-woman operation. Is there something that you've thought about that would be a good place to start? And if not, what would be your advice to that person?
Well, I would want to, my first question for that person would be whether or not they have had experience running a portion of the business as a manager in another company. Until you've had that experience of dealing with customers, dealing with accounting, dealing with people, with leading people, I would really counsel somebody to look for a situation where they can gain some of that experience with another company before they do it on their own.
Yeah, agreed. So your advice
and
would
preferably with a company that is somewhat progressive or somewhat where the management of that company is open, invests in training, and gives their people responsibility and empowerment. You're not going to you may not learn much if you're working for one of these construction companies where the owner refuses to share any information, who micromanages everybody. There's plenty of dysfunctional construction companies out there. So I do think that it matters who you end up working with, but I would really counsel getting experience in a situation where where you've got some guidance.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I know how I was, and I was certainly not that wise or disciplined when I started my business. I just wanted to start my own business. And what I found a couple of years later was that I was lacking those skills. I didn't understand cash flow. I didn't understand all the other aspects of the business. I learned the hard way that there's a lot more to it than just putting buildings together. And in fact, that's the minority of a CEO's job. The majority of the job is dealing with everything else that surrounds the building process and the people, the insurance, the financing, taxes. There's so many other things that I think it's in the book, The E-Myth. I think that's right. I think the author of the book,
Michael Gerber.
Yeah, he says that most business owners are technicians who have an entrepreneurial spasm or something, or an entrepreneurial seizure, and they're really good at the technical aspects, and they have this idea that they want to start a business, and they have uninformed intuition, I guess, and they could certainly benefit from being mentored by somebody who has done it, get some real life experience without all the risk. And so I agree.
And also I think that, it seems like everybody will tell you, oh yeah, I want to start a business. But I think that it may not be for everybody. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a lot of room for people who want to be entrepreneurial in companies that like mine. I mean, the last thing I want is for some of my key managers to go out and start their own company. But what I do want is to create a situation where they can grow as much as they want right here at the company, where they can be entrepreneurial, where they can learn, where they can experiment, where they can put ideas on the table as if it was their own company. And and I think that for some people, I think that there is a lot of people out there who are in the trades, who've gone into business because they feel that is kind of like the next logical step. And a lot of them are miserable because they really are more technicians than businessmen. Mm-hmm. And it's, there's a lot of people out there who kind of fit into that category. And maybe it would have been better for them to wait a little bit longer, gain a little bit more experience, and then go out. Or maybe it would have been better for them not to go on their own at all.
Yeah, I agree. There is this a misconception, I think, that, a couple of misconceptions. One, that everybody can be an entrepreneur. And I just don't think everybody's wired for it.
Right.
The other,
you got to have like the right mix of ignorance and knowledge. You got to know enough about what you're doing to organize a company, but you got to be either ignorant enough about the risk, or you gotta have that thing that allows you to charge forward despite the ruin that you could face.
Yeah, and I was just talking to another business owner a few days ago, and I was talking about that exact situation, and that's a double-edged sword, because you need that ability to look at the risk and be extremely optimistic and be driven and just jump. But the other edge of that sword is that you tend to just jump at things, and that can get you in a lot of trouble too. It's a strength, if not managed properly, it turns into a weakness, and it can be the ruin. I found a report a few years ago about the red flags of that a contracting business is going under, and a lot of them point to the strengths of the business owner. It's really fascinating. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a misconception that everybody can be an entrepreneur, that everybody should be an entrepreneur, and I don't agree with that. And then the misconception is if you are entrepreneurial, then the misconception is that you have to go start your own business. And the reality
Yes.
is there are entrepreneurs like yourself who need entrepreneurial people in their organizations, CEOs. One of the most underserved and one of the positions that's least talked about is the number 2 guy, in my opinion.
I totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking that, you know, we're sitting here saying all this, but it's kind of a travesty that there isn't more talk about how construction business owners should set up their companies in a way that allows people to grow, like what we're talking about. I mean, there are too many guys out there who own successful construction companies. They've got their yachts, they've got their multiple houses, and their employees are underpaid or shut out of what's really going on at the company. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be a bigger problem.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a challenge because it requires a CEO who has self-awareness to realize that, yes, these are my strengths, but these can also be my downfalls. And it requires somebody who can surround themselves with people who are strong enough to point out their blind spots and raise their hand and say, you're doing it again. Hey.
Right. Right.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about your approach to leadership. How do you think about leadership?
Well, I can tell you maybe some things that I've learned that I have been trying to apply lately that seem to be getting more traction than the way I was before. And I think that I'm not so unique in this. I think a lot of entrepreneurs they live their lives at a fast pace. They process a lot of information. They have a lot of ideas. They want to move forward in a lot of different directions all at the same time. And, I think that the way I used to be was kind of like 100 miles an hour in 10 different directions. And what I'm learning to be is slower in one direction at a time, or, just move slower and repeat it more. There's one of the biggest things I've learned is when you want to see something implemented in a company of our size, that if you try to do it too fast or if you try to do too many things at once, it's almost destined for failure. But if you focus on the one thing, if you can figure out what the one thing is, or maybe even two things that if you could change those two things would make the most difference, and you just spent an entire year on those two things, and you talked about it every chance you got, and everybody in the company can repeat back to you what those two things are, I think that you would see a lot more progress, a lot more forward momentum if you focus on less, but you focus on really making sure that the message is understood across the board, and that that everybody understands exactly what's going on. If you just do less, longer, repeat more, just slow down.
Good advice. So what's your thought process for determining what's the one or two things that you should focus on for the next 6 months? Like, if you were coaching someone to determine what are those things in their business, what are the questions you would ask them, or what would your thought process be?
I think it would be a little tough if you were completely starting from scratch. I think here at Millworks by Design, we've done a lot of work on trying to define what our values are, what our core values are, what our strategy is, what our priorities are, kind of trying to work our way down from the big picture into the more granular things that can be done on a day-to-day basis that would have the most impact. I mean, I can tell you for us this last year, one of those things has been safety, is increasing our positive results in the area of safety. And sometimes those kinds of things are driven by previous poor performance, where you realize that the company has been performing poorly in an area. And when you run the numbers and you look at what kind of impact it would have if you were performing well in that area, I think that ties into it. You got to look at what it is that you're trying to accomplish and what things are going to have the most impact on what you're trying to accomplish.
And I would assume the temptation would be 1 or 2 months into the process, some other opportunity comes up, and the temptation would be to jump to something else. But would your advice be to make a decision that you're going to focus on something for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and then just stick to it and avoid the distractions?
Yes. I mean, I do think that within every company there is, you have to make a difference between the tactical and the strategic. Mm-hmm. And the tactical would be the things that just happen or need to happen every day, every week, every month. The rhythmic things that happen within your company. Billings have to go out every month. Payroll has to be cut every week. So there's certain things that have to happen regardless of any key area of focus. But I think in terms of strategy, yes, I do believe that you need to focus on 1 or 2 things at a time, depending on the size of your company. If we were talking a very large company that had multiple business groups and things like that, then you might have multiple different focuses. But for a single group of people, I think you really got to slow it down on the strategy side. So what I'm saying is, you might recognize something that needs to be tweaked or improved on the tactical side, which I would go for, but I would still maintain a focus on a single or 2 important strategic issues.
Good advice. What's your approach to a company's culture, and how important is the culture at your organization?
I do think that culture is extremely important. There's a lot of talk in the business community, business books, about culture. A lot of it about building a positive culture. I think the reality is that your company has a culture, whether you have shaped it or not. It could be negative, it could be positive, and it probably has a little bit of both, no matter what you do. But I do think that culture is very important. And I mean, one of the ways that we kind of think about it here is we want to maintain a feeling where no matter how big the company is, we still feel like a small company. Large company resources, small company feel. Because it's the small companies that seem to have the best culture. That's when you have the small group of people that are tight, they understand each other. It's when you get a lot of people together that, unless you're very intentional about it, you can easily lose that small company feel.
One of the things I've noticed is that as companies grow, they tend to become less nimble and more bureaucratic.
Yes.
Is that something that you are concerned about? And if so, what do you do about that? How do you not become a big bureaucratic organization with growth?
It is something that I'm concerned about. I think that there is a certain amount of bureaucracy that is needed. I think bureaucracy has a bad connotation. there's a certain level that's needed. I mean, you can't manage a company with a lot of people without having some level of bureaucracy. I mean, I think most people would agree that having more than 7 or 8 direct reports for any single manager is probably too much. And so if you think about it, if a company moves from 5 to 10 people, or 10 people to 20 people, or 20 to 30, there's a certain level that the complexity of the company rises. And the more people that you bring in, the higher and faster it rises. And so bureaucracy is meant to simplify things, to layer things so that so that one person is not carrying the load of trying to communicate with everybody. Now, that being said, if the bureaucracy is too strong, or if there's decisions that are being made that don't make sense at the field level, at the lowest levels, then you've got a problem. You're too bureaucratic. If you have people who are following procedures that don't add any value to the company, you're too bureaucratic. So what we try to do is, and I think this is something that you constantly have to fight. It's not like you fix it one time and then it's over. Every time your company fluctuates in size, or new people come in, other people leave, it changes the dynamic, and it's something that you constantly have to fight. But we are trying to set up communication and having certain types of meetings that happen on a regular basis with various different managers, so that the people at the highest level of the company know what's going on at the field level, and within a week or so of things occurring, and also so that the people at the field level understand the decisions and the direction and the outlook from the people at the top level. And so I think that the biggest, at least from my experience and my perspective right now, I think the biggest thing that can be done to fight bureaucracy is to make sure that communication is moving up and down the chain of command as smoothly and quickly as possible.
Makes sense. I completely agree. Switching gears a little bit, are you a member of a CEO group or a Vistage group or anything of that nature, or have you been in the past?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm currently part of a group right now.
How has that helped you? I mean, what are the real, maybe not so obvious benefits to a business owner or CEO to being in a group like that? Well, I've been part of this group for, I think, going on 5 years now. And I'm going to be honest with you, there's times where I wonder if it's worthwhile, because at least with our group, we take 1 day a month to meet. And so I'm taking an entire day away from the business to meet with this peer group. And I think that if you've been with a group for a long time, that there can be a tendency for a little bit of staleness to creep in. That being said, I have gotten insight from the group that I'm part of that has helped me avoid bad decisions. I can probably count 4 or 5 different times where I had an opportunity and I brought it to the group as a challenge. And because of the input and the questioning and the playing of devil's advocate that occurred, I made the decision that I thought that I wouldn't make. Maybe I decided not to pursue an opportunity, or maybe I pursue it a little bit differently than I had intended to. And I think that because of the perspective from the other members of the group, the lessons that they've learned in their careers, the issues that they're dealing with in their business,
even just being involved in other people's challenges, there's a ton of takeaway that you can apply to your own situation. And I know I had an opportunity probably just 2 months ago that I brought to the group, and because of the input of the group, I decided not to pursue it, and they brought 2 or 3 key things to my attention that I literally it hadn't even occurred to me. And it completely changed the way that I was looking at that situation. So, I mean, right there, I think that's a lot of value when you can bring up something and where people can ask you a question or can challenge you in a way that makes you think about something that had not even occurred to you, even when you're really trying your best to think through something and and look at things objectively.
Yeah, no, that's good. You definitely can't go wrong being in a room or being connected with other business owners who have more experience or different experience, or maybe they can point out your blind spots. They can help you out.
And I also think that there is something to getting away from the company once a month, and there's something that happens in your mind when you're involved in a discussion. It doesn't have to be about your business necessarily. It's about somebody else's business. But there's something that happens that I think is the combination of being offsite and discussing stuff that is relevant to your situation that just sends the light bulbs off. I mean, I always end up having ideas or thinking about things in a different way than I was before.
Good stuff. We've got a few minutes here before we wrap up. A couple more questions for you. What is one topic that people in the construction industry are not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
Well, I think for us in the residential side, I know this is totally different on the commercial side, but I think there needs to be a lot more focus on safety on the residential side of construction. I think that if you compare the state of safety on residential to the state of safety on commercial, I mean, we are failing big time on the residential side. I'm aware of companies on the commercial side who have 2,000 craft workers who have an experience modification of 0.65. 2 million hours a year and maybe 1 or 2 injuries out of 2 million man hours a year. And I can guarantee you that any of my peers on the residential market that we serve have a much worse record than that. So I think safety on the residential side is a big thing that a lot of people need to get behind. And then I also think, and this is not going to be a surprise, and it's actually being talked about a lot more. I've been seeing a lot of coverage on it recently, which is about the inflow of young people into construction. And I think a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are trying to figure out what to do about it, but I think it's such a big issue. It's such a cultural issue that nobody knows where to start. And I think it's so big that it's really hard to start because you might feel like what you're doing is so insignificant. But I think we have a real problem with young Americans really looking at construction, especially the trades, as a viable profession or a respectable profession.
Is there anything specific that you're doing with your company to try to solve that problem or fill that gap?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that we are talking about the fact that we want our field guys to consider themselves professionals. that it's okay to feel that way, that it's okay to look at a career in the trades as a respectable career. There's a stigma in our culture, in our society, that that really discourages young people to look at a career in the trades as professional. Mm-hmm. You know, they typically will come into the company thinking that they're going to do this temporarily until they find something better, but they enjoy working with their hands so much that they almost feel guilty for wanting to do it full time, or for not feeling motivated about finding another career outside of the trade. So, you know, we're trying to show them that, for one, pay wise, it's comparable or better than some of their white collar counterparts. And that there's just as much value in what they're doing than anybody who wears a tie to work.
What are there unexpected benefits to hiring young people that other people need to be aware of? Like, maybe there's somebody listening to this who thinks, anybody with less than 10 years experience in finished carpentry just doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Like, what's been your experience? What do the young people bring to the table that some people maybe don't realize?
I think that the kids that we see now, I think that they have a high capacity to learn. I think there's a big misunderstanding about millennials, and I hear a lot of griping about millennials. But the biggest difference that I see with millennials, which I actually think is a good thing, is that the older generations kind of have this idea of shut up, pay your dues, just do the work, do as I say, and after a while, you'll start getting it, you'll start rising. Millennials want purpose. Mm-hmm. They want to know why, and I think that once they know why, if you can communicate with them in a way that they understand the purpose of what they're doing, then they get down to the business of learning what they're doing, and they usually learn it really fast. And I think when you have someone with that kind of mindset, like kind of questioning why all the time, it usually will open up ideas. They may have ideas that you've never heard before. They might have a different angle. They might have a different approach. They might have a lot of stupid ideas, but there might be a couple in there that are really, really solid. Whereas if you're just approaching this like you got to pay your dues, you may not be looking at things that way. And yeah. I think that people who are bringing young people in, I think they need to look for some of the positives rather than just gripe about the negatives.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, that it's much easier today. Well, people coming into the trades today can get up the learning curve much faster than they could 20 years ago with the with YouTube and all the online resources that are available. Like 20 years ago, if you wanted to learn how to cut crown molding, then you had to go find somebody, or you could go to the library and check out a book. But now you can get up that learning curve much faster, and you can learn techniques. Different techniques are picked up and spread through YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. There's just a much more knowledge available out there, and
there is
the millennials, the young folks are certainly tapped into that technology, and they're going to use that to their advantage. So that's a really good point. So appreciate you sharing that. Last question for you. Any book recommendations? Like anything that you've read that's been really impactful, either for business, not for business purposes? Anything you could share?
Yes, I have a long book list. I'm a big reader, but there's a couple that have been especially impactful. Recently, I would say a book, Team of Teams.
Oh yeah.
It was a really good one. That one's written by General Stanley McChrystal, and I think anybody trying to figure out how to manage a business in the information age really needs to give that one a good look. I really enjoyed that one. And another favorite, which kind of speaks into what I was mentioning earlier about slow leadership, doing things slowly, which actually end up in more speedy and permanent results. A book called Great by Choice by Jim Collins is one that was really, really impactful to me. In fact, I have two portraits in my office of two of the people who are mentioned in that book. And that book is really it's really a case study, which is one of the things I really love about Jim Collins' writings. Is it's not just some theory that he's pulling out of thin air, but he uses companies and he uses a rigorous approach to putting together a case study for his ideas. And that book is about companies who have proven to be great, have sustained great results in particularly challenging industries.
Yeah, you definitely can't go wrong with Jim Collins. And I agree, Team of Teams was really impactful for me. It changed the way I thought about business and leadership. And actually, in the company that I ran for a few years, I had implemented a lot of those systems and then read the book and realized that those were a lot of the strategies that I hadn't really thought much about, but they're the things I stumbled into that worked, like shared consciousness, pushing power
Right.
to the edge, equipping people closest to the problem to solve the problems. And I actually interviewed the co-author, Chris Fussell, on episode 32. So
Yeah, I
listening to
think I
this,
heard that. Yeah,
that was one of my favorite interviews. So yeah, and it's always fun to talk to. I mean, it's always fun to talk to and listen to a Navy SEAL. I mean,
yes.
how cool is that? So,
Yeah, totally.
well, I want to be a good steward of your time, Dan. I know you're a busy man, so we'll wrap this up. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Either parting advice for whether it's startups, business owners. If you had an opportunity to talk for 30 seconds about any topic you wanted to a bunch of construction leaders, what would you tell them?
I would say don't forget to celebrate. I think that so many of us entrepreneurs, we are so focused on the future and always pushing forward, pushing through, going on to the next thing, the next job, the next meeting, the next proposal, the next whatever, that we often forget to stop and celebrate the small successes along the way. And I think that if you don't do that, you burn out your people. But if you can learn how to stop and look at the successes and celebrate them, it just provides so much more meaning. And I'll tell you what, it's something that I'm really bad at because I'm often living 5 years in the future. You know, that's where my head is at. But it's just so important to do that. So that's what I would say. Just make sure to celebrate.
Great advice. Well, Dan, if people want to get in touch with you, what's your website? What are the best ways for people to follow you, either on social media, get in touch with you, find out more about your business on the internet? What are some links that I can stick in the show notes for people to go to?
Well, they can get me on LinkedIn. I think it's Dan Parish on LinkedIn. We have a pretty active Instagram account. So if you look up at Millworks by Design, you can see pictures of our work. You can see a lot of action shots. And of course, there's our website, millworksbydesign.com.
Perfect. Well, I'll be sure to have those links in the show notes, and I'll have the link you can get to at the end of this podcast where you can find those show notes and notes of all the other things we talked about, the book recommendations, some other highlights from the conversation. So Dan, man, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of other people. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dan. That was a good conversation. Lots of good practical advice from a guy who started a business, has grown it to significant size. So if you are running a business or you want to start a business someday, make sure and go to constructionleadingedge.com/055 for the notes and the links and the ways you can get in contact with Dan. And don't forget, if you want to increase your crew's productivity, whether you own a business or you're a project manager, or project engineer, or foreman, whatever it is, these are strategies that you can use to improve your crew's productivity. And go to constructionleadingedge.com/productivity. Sign up for that 3-part video series in your email box. I guarantee it will help you. And until next time, I'm Todd DeWalt. Thanks for listening.